Welcome to the explanation, page by page, of the TREC 1 to 4 Family Residential Contract. This is Ann LaCusta, and I'm your broker. And this is going to be a quick bullet point summary of page 2 of this contract. Let's start with paragraph 8 right here. This is paragraph 8. And you will be choosing between either that the standard printed exception as to discrepancies, conflicts, shortages in area either will be amended or will not be. Choice number 1 is will not be amended or deleted from the title policy. Choice number 2 is will be amended to read shortages in area at the expense of buyer and seller. What this means is basically insurance in case there's an error or inconsistency with the survey. And so usually you're going to choose this number 2. Number 2 right here, will be amended to read, which does give your buyer some protection in case there's an error on the survey. It is fully negotiable, buyer or seller, although I believe it is most customary to see that the buyer would pay for it because it is just a little extra insurance for that buyer. So particularly if the seller is providing an old survey, if there are any questions about the survey, you will for sure want to pick this number 2 box. Actually, this coverage is not very expensive, and so most of the time you're going to choose this number 2. You do not have to. It is going to be your buyer client's choice, and if it's in a neighborhood with standard lots and they've been the same lots forever, your buyer client could choose number 1 if they want to, but make sure they understand that it is basically insurance in case of any sort of error on the survey. All right, let's move down now and look at paragraph C, which is also about the survey. And in paragraph C, you have 3 choices of how to handle the survey. In C1, you have so many days, and it says seller shall furnish. Seller shall is a command phrase. So this means that the seller has already located their survey, and they've already produced a T47 affidavit. So if you're on a listing appointment and your seller says they're going to go in the attic and find it, let's be sure they do that sooner rather than later. Don't wait until you get an offer. And that they go ahead and stop by the title company and get this T47 affidavit notarized and signed by all the ownership parties. So if there's a husband and wife owner, then let's get them both to sign and have notarized that T47. What the T47 says is that there have been no changes on the survey and that the survey is true and correct to the best of the seller's knowledge. Changes to the survey would be fence line changes, any additional concrete poured, a pool added, any changes like that. So if there have been no changes, they can go and sign that T47 affidavit. Notice that it says if the seller, if you choose this C1, if the seller fails to provide an existing survey, then it is at the seller's expense that another survey is ordered no later than 3 days prior to closing. Because of the seller shall phrase, if they do not produce it, then it is a seller expense. If they produce it and it is not acceptable, so this phrase right here, not acceptable to title company or buyer's lender, then buyer shall obtain a new survey at either seller or buyer's expense. Fully negotiable. Frequently it is at the buyer's expense because it is their lender, their transaction that's causing a new survey to be necessary. Notice that C2 says we're just going to get a new survey and it's going to be at the buyer's expense. And C3 says we're just going to get a new survey and it's going to be at the seller's expense. Be very aware that if you're dealing in any larger pieces of property, surveys can be very expensive. So make sure you know what you're obligating your buyer or your seller to as an estimated cost of the survey. All right, let's scroll down just a little bit and look at objections. This D paragraph, this is a blank right here that you can use. So if anything shows up on the title commitment that would be objectionable to your buyer, you're going to want to put it right here. A very common one is installation of pool swimming pool of the buyer's choice. So if the survey or title commitment show an easement or anything that would prohibit the construction of a swimming pool of the buyer's choice, this would then give the buyer the right to terminate the contract. So if that is a buying decision, they don't want it, if they can't put in a pool, then this is where you would write that. And the buyer must object the earlier of either the closing day or this many days after they get the commitment. So if you're the listing agent, you don't want to give the buyer all the way to closing day to object. You want to give them a certain number of days after they've received all this information to object. And then the seller has 15 days to cure it, or the buyer can terminate and get their earnest money back. Because at the time of contract, they let the seller know they wanted to be able to do whatever is in this blank. If they find out they cannot do it, then they have the right to terminate the contract and they get their earnest money back. We also want to look at paragraph E2, which is about membership in a property owner association. These are two very important boxes that you make the correct and accurate choice. The property either is or is not subject to mandatory, keyword mandatory, membership in a property owners association. So there are many voluntary associations that have July 4th picnics and that kind of thing, but that's voluntary. Mandatory means that the association can actually lien on your property if you do not pay your dues or if you are in a violation of one of their codes in regards to the condition of your property. So you will work with clients who absolutely refuse to live where there is a mandatory homeowners association. Texas homeowners associations are strict and have a lot of power. So you will occasionally find a buyer who says, absolutely not. I want to go live in the country. I don't want anybody telling me their rules, and I don't want it. You'll also have clients that refuse to live anywhere that doesn't have a mandatory homeowners association. They want those rules. They want all their neighbors following that rule. So whether it is or is not in a mandatory homeowners association is a very important question for buyers. So make sure you get this correct. And make sure that you understand that mandatory homeownership dues are not a choice. You are obligated to pay those dues and any assessments that are voted on by that homeowners association. So it's actually very important that your buyer client and your seller client provide the correct information and receive the correct information so that they can proceed to closing and understand what they're being obligated to do. And that is the end of page 2.